Hello everyone, my name is Mukul and this is the Deep Neural Notebooks podcast. This is a podcast where I like to discuss topics ranging from deep learning, natural language processing and computer vision to neuroscience and open source software through conversations with experts about their thoughts on the state of their specializations, their journeys so far and the road ahead. This is the 10th episode of the podcast and a really special one. I've got the authors of the Practical Natural Language Processing book by O'Reilly. For those of you who don't know, this book is essentially a comprehensive guide to building, iterating, and scaling real-world NLP systems. From software engineers to data scientists to machine learning engineers to product managers and business leaders, this book is for anyone who is in any way involved in building NLP systems in industry. The book is already topping the charts on Amazon and has been endorsed by various experts from industry and academia. So for this episode, I talked to the authors Sowmya, Bodhi, Anuj and Harshit. Sowmya is a researcher at the National Research Council in Canada, which is the country's largest federal research and development organization. In the past, she has been involved in academia as a faculty at the Iowa State University and in the industry at Microsoft and various other companies. Bodhi is a computer science PhD student working on NLP and machine learning at UC San Diego. His research interests include language generation and dialogue and interactive systems. Anuj is currently the head of machine learning and data science at Vahan. He has built NLP and ML systems for Fortune 100 companies and several startups as a senior leader. Harshit is the co-founder at DeepFlux. He has been involved in building and scaling machine learning systems and engineering pipelines for several Silicon Valley startups as a founder and an advisor. So in this episode, I've asked them everything about the book. We talk about the key ideas behind the book, about how it bridges the gap between theory and building practical machine learning and NLP systems. We talk about the inspiration behind the book, about how it stands out, about the people who could benefit from the book, about how it has been structured, and lots more. We also talk about the elephant in the room, which is GPT-3, and try to make sense of the hype around it and to understand the broader impact and how it positions us as a society to leverage these systems on a wider scale. We also talk about the state of machine learning and NLP systems in general, about the various misconceptions and misinformed expectations that surround these fields in the context of the business of AI, and about how they've tried to incorporate this message in the book. Thanks to O'Reilly and the authors, we're giving away 5 copies of the Practical NLP book. In the description of this video or audio, you will find a link to the tweet accompanying the giveaway. To participate, all you have to do is retweet it and comment about your favorite part from the conversation with the Practical NLP hashtag. And so if you'd like to be updated about the results, you can subscribe to the channel or follow me on Twitter at MKULKHANNA. You can also get a free trial to the book on O'Reilly's website using the promo code TNLP20. I'm really thankful to have been able to host all my amazing guests who have come to the podcast and shared their journeys and stories through these conversations. If you like these conversations or get some value out of these conversations, please give a thumbs up or a 5-star rating depending on the streaming platform. It really helps the channel and allows the content to reach out to more people. Thank you. Hello everyone. Good morning for those of you who are in India, and thank you so much for doing this. Congratulations to you for your Practical Natural Language Processing book with O'Reilly, and I'm really really excited for today's interview. I have a bunch of questions for you all about the book, about the inspiration, about how your experiences have influenced the book, about the state of AI and machine learning in general, and I'm really excited to have all of your diverse perspectives about AI and machine learning basically, and natural language processing in general. So thank you for doing this. And so we'll start with the introduction first. Like for the few people who probably don't know who all of you are, could each of you like give a brief introduction about what you do? And yeah, I think we could start with that. Yeah.
I'm Sowmya. I work as a researcher at the National Research Council in Canada. I was also an alumni of IIIT Hyderabad. I did my master's there, and I did my PhD in the University of Tübingen in Germany, and then spent some time in Iowa State University as a tenure track assistant professor. And then after 2.5 years there, I moved to Canada. I worked as a data scientist in the industry for about a year before moving into a government research organization. So I primarily work on multilingual NLP, so developing NLP solutions for many languages. And I'm kind of, my research interests are more in the area of educational applications of natural language processing. So yeah, that's my background.
Hi, myself Bodhi. I'm a rising third year PhD student at UC San Diego. I'm doing my PhD in computer science with Professor Julian Macaulay. Currently, I am interning at Microsoft Research, and previously I worked at Google AI, where I built systems that included NLP and text processing, and we have deployed it for millions of users. My general research interest is language generation and dialogue and interactive systems, where I love to research with interaction between human and computers and find out various ways of moderating them. Yeah.
Hey, my name is Anuj. I am currently heading machine learning team at Vahan. Prior to this, I have incubated and led a bunch of machine learning teams at early stage startups as well as big organizations. Prior to that, I was in academia at IIT Delhi, Triple IT Hyderabad. My work has been at various facets of machine learning, but large parts of it is around NLP. That's about me.
Hey guys, I'm Harshit. I'm currently a co-founder and CTO at Deflux. I also started my NLP journey at Triple IT Hyderabad and then did applied research and built systems at CMU and MIT Media Lab. And I've also built startups and engineering pipelines in different Valley companies. My general focus has been making sure that whatever NLP and machine learning you do, that is out to the public and that could be used. So, getting products from prototypes and POCs to out into real users is what I have spent last few years with.
So yeah, so all of you come from like quite different backgrounds. Like you've shared a few universities probably, but like Bodhi is a PhD student, Harshit and Anuj are working in the industry. Sowmya is more from an academic background. So how did you guys meet, and how was the idea for the book originally? How did the book start off? Like how did you guys meet, and yeah, how did you go about it?
So Anuj has been doing these workshops at NLP, I think, since 2015. And, I was helping Anuj out in the summer of 2017. And, that is when we and Bodhi were also collaborating. And that is when, some publisher approached us and we started thinking about writing a book on NLP. And yeah. And Sowmya joined us, in 2018. And yeah.
Yeah, I think as Harshit said, I mean, this idea primarily came from our experiences where we saw that uh, there is a need of a, a content that can give a more pragmatic aspect or pragmatic view of NLP, and that's when these discussions started. And then yeah, I mean, as Harshit said, I and Harshit thought of this idea, and then Bodhi joined, and then Soumya joined, and yeah, after 3 years it's actually a reality.
Right. So it's been a long journey. And before we talk more about the book, about the ideas that it presents, could either of you give a brief introduction for the people who just found out about the book, about what ideas it is presenting, and could like someone give a brief introduction of the book for people who are not aware of it?
So the book is essentially around building, iterating, and scaling NLP systems, uh, and then also addressing in a big way how to tailor these solutions for various industry verticals. And towards the end of the book, we also cover a playbook in order to deliver successful NLP projects. So I think those are some of the pillars around which the entire book is based around.
Right. So a more practical approach of it, taking theory to sort of product in some way, or
Yes.
like, yeah. And so what would you say is the unique selling point of the book what has been the target throughout the book. Could we talk about that? Plus, like, what sort of gap did you notice in the field, and how did you want to address that gap, and probably provide some information about how that gap could be bridged? And yeah, so what has been the target of the book, a unique selling point of the book? Yeah.
So I would say the target has been for a lot of people in industry. How can you take what is being done in academia and take it forward and actually successfully build products? We all understand that, and we all know that the field is evolving extremely fast. Every single day, you keep on hearing a lot of new models and breakthroughs. But does all of that directly translate into progress in industry? So how do you balance that thing out? Secondly, while a lot of the cutting edge is a great work, and that is a must needed, but from an industry perspective, the battle is more around data rather than model. And how do you address that? How do you, in a nutshell, how do you build NLP solutions successfully in industry, right from 0 to 1 of the entire process?
And to add to what Anuj just said, so what we noticed is that every industry vertical, whether it be healthcare or finance or e-commerce, NLP or generally machine learning is applied in a different way. They deal with different problems, and we found that this was just not covered anywhere formally. And that is something that we saw a lot of our colleagues struggling with, and that is why, besides what Anuj said, building NLP from 0 to 1, there's also a bunch of focus on building NLP for specific domains and whatever.
Yeah, I just wanted to add or reiterate what Anuj and Harshit said. Like in general, when there are many ways of solving a problem, right? And then you also directly, you don't build one model and stop there. Right? Maybe you start with a simpler one, and then gradually, as you collect more data or as you experiment more, you go from one model to the other, right? So that's something that's not exactly discussed explicitly anywhere, and that's one of the main things in our book, according to me. Like we focus on that aspect as much as possible in all chapters.
Yeah, I want to add something that is regarding the expectation of a project when you start, and especially that has been a generally problem in the industry, that there are always these hyped models that people use or are better marketed. So whenever let's say a startup start a new project, or even in a big industry, a team is starting a new project, they generally tend to follow those similar recipes for all the projects, but that's not always true, and that's not always give you the satisfactory outcome. And it's mainly because there is an expectation mismatch of what you want to achieve from the project you have defined compared to what's out there or what's being portrayed. Most of the time, in many of the cases, there are examples that are cherry picked that you see in these big models, or there are demos which only targets to the best solutions. But whenever you try to apply those solutions in your project, you may not get that output. So it's very important to set the right expectation and then build incrementally towards what you want to achieve. And that's exactly the recipe we wanted to cover throughout the book. In various NLP tasks we cover, in various use cases we present, and in various domains we talk about. So I think that's we have been facing in our experiences, and we definitely wanted to combine that wisdom into the book.
So I think if we have to say it in a line, I think it's a view and advice from trenches, having been there and done that, and what really works, what does not work, how do you make those choices. And like I said previously, data often beats models when it comes to industry. So investing more in data helps you much more than investing in models. I mean, by improving a model, you might gain 2 or 3%, but often in industry, by investing in data, you can easily gain 10 to 20%. Right? for some reason, I mean, improvements as model is considered better than improvement in data. But if you think from an industry perspective, it doesn't matter. What matters is the improvement and how quickly you can get that done.
Right. So one thing I noticed with the book was that most other books from O'Reilly or like any other publishers, they usually cover the more theoretical aspects or the practical, the more engineering aspects of things. And whereas with this book, you've tried to talk about how you could create viable systems and about what different kinds of people who are involved in a product, how they could, what are the best practices for them, how they could be more realistic about their expectations and things like that. So how do you think this book compares with the other books that are out there, and is that something that you've thought about or discussed before, like how you wanted this book to stand out a little different from the other ones, and uh, was that a conscious choice, or like was that something that just came about over time? Yeah.
I think we have already thought about it when we're structuring the proposal of the book, that how our book should stand out among all the other books that are out there in the market. And there has been an influx of uh, uh, new books, especially on NLP, that are coming from various top publishers, including O'Reilly. So we definitely wanted to set out our goal differently than all the other books, so that this book stands out, as well as they can work as a uh, um, as a complement with the other books, so people can read multiple books and they can get different senses. So to break it down in a more structured manner, I think you can categorize different books that are available in the market into three buckets. One is the textbooks that has been taught, for years in courses, and that are out there written by big professors. So that's one category. Another new category that's been very popular recently is applying deep learning in NLP, and there has been a whole range of techniques that these books discuss, that how to apply very specific deep learning algorithm in various NLP solutions, and that's heavily focused on these deep learning algorithms. And then there is another set of books, what we mostly call as a handbook, that's another category, that's the final category, where the book it picks up a particular framework, for example PyTorch or TensorFlow or NLTK, and it explains all the various NLP tasks in the light of that framework. So these are the three broad category that we have seen the current book that belong to. And but so we wanted to be different from what this book offers, and we wanted to again bridge the gap, bridge the missing information that these books are not fully covering, or one of the bucket is not covering in all the aspects. So that is the first breakdown we made when we were thinking about how do we come up with unique selling points for our book. Now let's come to the other way around. It's the in what direction, so what are these unique points should be that these different categories of book fail to cover. And we found certain dimensions that are quite important in the industry, which probably are not so important or not so well thought in a typical academic or research scenario. For example, the usage or application of rule-based and machine learning algorithms, because we felt from our experiences that you still need these rule-based models or normal machine learning models, which are not very advanced deep learning models. And many of these books from other categories do not always discuss that when do you use this rule-based model, or do you at all use these rule-based models or not. So that is one dimension, and we wanted to cover that. Secondly, what we found is very important, and that's not mostly covered in many of the articles around or books around, is how do you handle data scarcity or different volumes of data. So as I said, in a different stages of your project, you can have different volume of data. It could be small, it could be large, etc. So what's the recipe should be with your varying amount of data you have, and how your algorithm, how your approach towards the problem would change. So we definitely wanted to tackle that question, and most of the time one or more other categories of the books, they do not cover this issue. Another thing we wanted to focus, and that's also kind of linked to what previously we discussed, that the pipeline approach, that looking at the software engineering approach and looking at the ML ops that usually people follow in normal data science, machine learning projects. How do you add up those best practices in an NLP project? And that's why we call our book as an AI project playbook, because we step by step tell you that how do you start a project from a business idea, data collection, building your model, iteration, deployment, etc. And then I think the final bullet point would be the industry and business focus. So we explicitly have dedicated chapters for different domains where people are not always sure that how they convert a problem from that particular domain to an NLP problem. And then they can solve that NLP problem using the typical methods. For example, we cover various NLP tasks in e-commerce, retail, social media, healthcare, law, finance, and I don't think any of the books from the other categories I described, they do explain these as in the details that we are trying to present. So in that way, I think these are the main dimensions we wanted to focus. So these are the unique selling points as well as kind of the differentiating factor from the other books that are currently in the market.
Another way, Mukul, to think about the book would be it's like a handbook for all problems that you might face in industry. And it may not have the final solution to what you're looking for, but it will be a starting point to most problems that you will face while building real NLP solutions. And that is why we have given almost 450 references that can lead you to other venues where you will find the solution, which might not be completely covered in the book. Right? So I thought that was being missed, so I just also added that.
Right. So what I feel that the convention so far has been that you only learn about the industry side of things, the business side of things, only once you get a job or you start as a developer or when you're working towards the product. But it's good to know that there is like a handbook that could sort of help people who are just starting out to sort of align their
Right. So another issue, Mukul, with what you're saying is that unless you are at a few companies like Google AI or Microsoft Research or a few selected companies, most folks also in industry may not be aware of all the best practices because this is such a fast-moving field. And often a lot of people who are doing machine learning or data science are folks who might have come from engineering backgrounds without a strong theoretical understanding. And on the other hand, there are people who have deeper theoretical understanding, but they have never worked in industry, right? So that subset is that intersection is pretty small, and that is only visible or only available. That kind of training is only available at certain companies and certain groups. But so as you said that you only learn once you once you join industry. That may not always be true depending on where what teams people are working with, and that is something we also noticed in the workshop that Anuj has been conducting. That pretty senior people with pretty respectable companies may not be aware of all these nuances. It's such a fast moving.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to reiterate the point I said before about the expectation, because this kind of vicious loop. So even when you join an industry, the senior leaders, they may not be aware of these best practices. So you still come to the wrong pipeline that you have been using, and so you might be learning wrong things. So or maybe not. I wouldn't say the wrong things are probably not the most effective way of approaching the business problem. So suboptimal approaches. So that's why we feel that this book is not only useful for beginners who wants to learn NLP, but also it would be extremely useful for product managers and CXOs, even business leaders who wants to kind of restructure their project or the way they think whenever they're starting a new venture or a new product, or maybe even in their current products.
And I think just to add to it, Mukul, so as Harshit rightly said, I mean, apart from a couple of organizations which have been doing AI ML for a very long period, most of the organizations are getting into for the first time. And in our personal experience, what we have seen is that at most organizations, the first set of teams, AI teams, end up getting churned, either by choice or for whatever reason. And so there are a lot of lessons which are hard learned. And before burning hands, I mean, it is good that there is there are certain resources that can address this. And that's where the book is positioned in such a way. I mean, there is a lot of content out there which addresses of how to build models and stuff. But what we felt is what is really needed in order to make it work in industry is a perspective from an insider's perspective.
I think in one of the previous discussions, you also mentioned that one of the things that you wanted to bring forward with the book was the idea that AI is not the silver bullet for everything, and that probably you should be more intelligent about how you approach a problem, and you should not just start with AI. And what we're noticing is that companies are moving towards that and trying to sell the idea that they're using deep learning in some way and trying to attract customers using that. So could you talk about how you've tried to sort of address this hype in the book, and about how probably people are not very well positioned to take advantage of this? Like, yeah, could you explain about that?
So I think, Mukul, I mean, deep learning has made great advances in recent years, and we see a lot of articles that are coming every day in popular uh, channels, right? Now, this has created a perception literally like if there is any problem that is hard to solve, you should apply deep learning or AI. Truth is far from it, right? At the end of the day, the objective is to solve the problem. Deep learning is just a tool to do it, and it's a tool that can solve only certain kind of problems. And in our personal experience, we have seen many cases where either problems are highly ill-formed. I mean, you don't even need machine learning, I mean, at all. Or even if you need machine learning, a simple rule-based solutions or simple models can solve the problem, rather than bringing in big guns to solve it upfront. So, so the book gives a realistic picture. You can literally think of the book as there's a machine learning team in a particular organization X, which is trying to solve an NLP problem. How they should go about, what are the various constraints, what are the various choices they will face, at what stage which choice is better, at what stage what constraint can be ignored and what constraint becomes dominating, so that at the end of it you can deliver models that are in production, serving your customers and bringing the value proposition. So that's the key thing according to me.
Yeah, I think there are two major point I would like to mention here, which we again pointed out before. One is the data, and one is finally when you're serving to the user. And deep learning models kind of have the weaknesses in both of these areas, which we often tend to miss. And that's again coming back to the point of wrong expectation, because we often forget that end of the day we have to build a product, deliver it to the user. So so before I come to the deployment part, I'll come to the data part. That's also a curious case of wrong expectation. Oftentimes we think that okay, we can try with whatever data we have, or we can try with any public data sets. But most of the time that will not work for your case, because either your problem is very specific to your domain, so that all of the public data sets will not be applicable, or you can't just use it. Or on the other hand, even if you want to use your own data set, you may not have sufficient data to train or fine tune a deep learning model to get the desired performance, because all of these models are extremely data hungry. That's a USP of this deep learning model, that as you feed more data, as you feed more information, this model can learn internal representations that are not obvious from the data you usually have, or these models have so much capacity, it can learn many internal representations that are much more nuanced, and it can then hallucinate in a proper manner later, where it can work for a test example that you haven't provided during the training time. But that only will work if you have a lots of data. But most of the cases you may not have that, or if your data distribution or data looks very different than what your deep learning model has been trained on, then there is already a mismatch. So that is one problem at the start of the project. And let's say even if you have a deep learning model, maybe your domain is perfectly aligned with whatever the model that is out there. But even in that case, let's say you have a model that has 100 billion parameters. How would you deploy that model to a cloud, which will act in a mobile app where user would be using in a latency of microseconds, right? So that's very difficult. And so in that case, you need lots of GPU. So you are essentially increasing your not only your parameter cost, but also your operational cost. And most of the time, small team startups cannot afford to do that, but they want to do something cool, so they started with a deep learning model. So either you fail at the beginning when you don't have the data, you go in a wrong path, or even if you go in the right path while serving that to the user, you might again fail. So it's very, very important to actually scope out, set the right expectations, scope out what you really want to do, understand what amount of data you have, understand what are the models that are out there and how they kind of align, and then finally also analyze that how that would pan out when you finally deploy it. So that's a whole range of different stages in a project that's already there. And that's exactly we wanted to discuss in an incremental fashion, in a pipeline fashion, that what should be your strategy, what's the recipe at every stage as you grow. And then again, we say that when you have all of these ingredients that are ripe to use a deep learning model, use a deep learning model. Simple.
Right, and to add to what Anuj and Bodhi said, so first of all, yes, people often forget about how you'll be serving the model, what will be the model properties that essentially influence what you build. So this is something that we have covered. Another thing that we have briefly touched upon is that why it's important to not follow the cutting edge science and think that this is what you can apply to your so Professor Zach Lepton and Professor Jacob Steinhardt, so they have done a very good work on why this can essentially derail your project instead of bootstrapping it and making it better. So
I just wanted to add to what everybody has said, just to give some more concrete examples from the book. Like, say, at several points, we have these examples where we build from very simple solutions to complex deep learning models. And there were cases where the deep learning models were just not the best models. But when you start there, like when you start directly with deep learning, we'll never know that there is a simpler solution which is probably easier to deploy, right? Like, and also there was I think one or two examples where there is like a 1% or 2% improvement with a very complex model, but then how much of it is actually useful for you, both in terms of like end user satisfaction and in terms of like, is it worth the cost involved? Like, is this 1%, 2% really worth the, I don't know, astronomical costs that will involve? So I think we have these discussions throughout the book, taking these examples concretely, along with talking about them in a more general sense, say in the last chapter or at the beginning of the book.
Right. So, like I mentioned before, I see that you guys have a lot of diverse background, and that is one reason why you have been able to touch upon various different perspectives of looking at machine learning and NLP in that sense. So could you talk about how your individual journeys and careers and insights, how from what you've done over the past few years, how that has shaped the book, how it has inspired the book in that sense?
Yeah, like Anuj and Harshit mentioned earlier, I became a part of the book much later compared to the other three. And considering that I don't have a lot of industry experience, I didn't really see myself writing this kind of a book. So when Anuj originally asked me to take a look at a chapter that they wrote, I was just doing that. I mean, I was just being the reviewer that we usually review for conferences and do different kinds of reviews. But then when he asked me if I can join, I didn't know what to say. Like, I wasn't sure if I can manage this, but then I like writing in general. I like communicating with people on different things. So it was hard to resist that opportunity to, write, communicate. So while writing the book, I think I learned a lot because, like I said, I don't have a lot of experience in different kinds of industries deploying NLP products. Like my post-PhD industry experience is just a year. I worked in industry before, but it was in a much junior role. So I was primarily doing what I was told, not building teams like I was doing last year. So in that sense, I learned a lot while I was writing this book. So there were some parts where I knew what I was doing, like say model building and these kind of things, or writing about how to, so preparing notebooks or these kind of things I was doing all the time because I was a faculty member. So that was my daily job, writing in a way that people hopefully will understand, So that was not my problem. My problem came where I had to write, I had to write more about practical things. Like, so I could write easily some parts where I actually had experience on, but then there were also these things like, say, for example, writing about end-to-end NLP process, or writing about how do you acquire data, like data augmentation and things like that. I just had no experience about it. So it was good to, it's good that we have four of us and coming from all sorts of different backgrounds. So I think that was really useful both in terms of writing the book as well as for me as an individual. I learned a lot about different aspects of NLP, non-academic aspects of NLP, to be more particular. And I also realized that when I was teaching courses in NLP, I was always using the traditional NLP textbooks that everyone uses, but then I don't think I had any student who eventually went into doing a PhD. Everyone eventually went to take up some industry job. So I knew very well that these textbooks are not really preparing them for those positions, like entry-level industry positions, but we had no alternative. Like at that time, I couldn't think of any other book to suggest to them because we need to have some theory. I just can't use a handbook as a textbook. We need to have some theory, but we need to have a lot of practical work as well. So while writing this book, and once this book came out, I was confidently talking about this book to my faculty colleagues, saying, hey, this is something you can look at if you want to teach a more applied course. So I think that answers your question from my side.
That's definitely. Yeah. Bodhi?
Yeah, I think for me, I came a very interesting point of my career to this project because I just finished my master degree. I joined in the industry. I was heavily working on hands-on on NLP projects, but then I was also preparing for my PhD, and I was about to join. So that was a very this project was first of all a learning experience for me, that when I kind of looked at different core tasks and I tried to write them, I found that there are many details I cannot remember right now. So I had to go back and find out how should I write it. And then again comes to the point of communication, and Sowmya mentioned that how do you really communicate that in a non-theoretical way, because you cannot go extremely theoretical when you're explaining in an applied book. So that is something was a learning experience and enlightening for me. I think, but I really enjoyed the part, especially the domain, different domain chapters we wrote. I still remember because I was working in an e-commerce company before. So writing or contributing to that chapter was really interesting to me, that I could come up with new use cases. And when I talk to other folks, sometimes my co-authors didn't know about that. Oh, this is a problem that actually exists in that particular domain where you could apply NLP. So that was really fun. And that also applies for the other chapters, when I learned from others that, okay, you could actually do that using NLP. And when you put down everything together, then I thought that, this is a nice book where I could actually go back when I'm interviewing for some of my research internships, or even talking to other folks. But so it's been it's kind of a 50-50. So 50% is contributing to the community, trying to understand what people are doing actually in industry, what are the problems right now out there in the industry, as a mismatch in expectation, etc. I talked about, and try to address that problem. And the rest of the 50% was a pure learning experience for me.
Yeah, so my journey into NLP started much differently, Mukul. So I was part of an organization early in my career, which was dealing with a lot of social media text, and that's when was for the first time when I encountered NLP. And what I realized quickly was that while that's when deep learning had already started to make a lot of inroads and come up with these beautiful findings. But what I realized is that two things. One, these models don't truly understand right? So questions like reasoning and why the model is doing what it is doing and stuff like that were hard to answer. And secondly, building a model is only 10% of a journey in industry. There is whole lot of 90% that nobody, I could hardly find anything online or enough resources up there that could really help me up there. And I actually learned a lot of this stuff hard way, and I and Harshit have had a chance to advise a bunch of startups in our journey. And we saw that similar kind of scenarios and problems were existing there. And that's where the idea of doing a workshop came to, that, okay, let's share our learnings. And this is what Harshit was referring earlier. This is what we were doing in 2016 onwards. And while doing, we realized that this is a much larger problem. Our workshop were attended by a lot of teams which were in various organizations. And we realized that all of them have this common threads that are completely missing. And that's when the idea came that, okay, it may be worth writing a book so that it is reachable to a much larger audience space. And that's how the project essentially started. And again, like as Bodhi also mentioned, we all come from very different background. So there are a lot of parts that even we were not aware of, and we have learned a lot from each other in that sense. Hopefully, collectively, we have done exhaustive work, even if we were mutually exclusive in that sense, to compile a whole kind of a playbook that one can literally use on a daily basis while working on projects in industry.
So yes, so my journey on NLP started in 2007 when I was doing academic research in NLP, and I think till 2011 I was involved in cutting edge of NLP and machine learning, publishing papers and so on. But after that, so I was largely involved in building startups or advising startups, where I had a very different experience on what goes in the trenches and how do you build things from scratch. So one thing that I really learned is the cutting edge, which I was not as aware of as say Bodhi is and others in the team were, because I was much more in the trenches. I had a much more in the trenches view. What helped, especially from my side, was that I'd been advising a range of teams for a long time, and especially startups, and I realized the problems that startups or smaller teams or teams which are not as equipped, don't have cutting edge PhD or PhD researchers working on their problem. And looking at NLP and AI projects from that lens was quite useful for some of the things that are there. I'll also add to this that I think this is something that Sowmya was too humble to not add, but Sowmya has been a professor and faculty at a range of universities, and I think that her background in education and teaching were quite useful in bringing certain aspects, pedagogical aspects to the book.
Yeah, so like Harshit mentioned, Sowmya, you probably have the most academic background, most experience with academia. And so how do you think that specifically helped you shape the book and provide sort of an academic background to the industrial experience that Harshit and Anuj bring to the picture? So how do you think that contributed to the book specifically?
I think, so this is of course what I think. Others may or may not agree with it. So I think the main way my academic background was useful for me, according to me, was in the way I was writing what I wanted to write. Basically, like often when you're like a good engineer, you'll not be a good writer, right? Like you have something in your head, but it's not always seen in a way that other people can understand. Like, I come from an engineering background, and a lot of my friends are engineers. So, and my husband is an engineer. So, I know, like, we are not exactly the best communicators around there. But then being not just being in academia, but actually being in teaching helped me with that part. Like, I think my ability to maybe write clearly or communicate clearly improved due to that work experience. So I think that was something that I hopefully helped when I was writing the book, and also when I was reading others what others wrote and writing, like giving some comments on that. Other than that, I think like when I was writing code, also I added a lot of comments to the code, because I was used to writing code for students. Sometimes students were just starting out, so I was used to adding in a lot of comments there, giving a lot of explanation. So that was, I think, also useful when I was writing for the book. I was doing the same thing. So hopefully the notebooks were relatively easier to clean up later because of that. I think I don't have much to add in that direction. I see the fact that my communication skills got better because of being in because of teaching helped me a lot while writing the book.
Sowmya, like one thing you mentioned last time was that this book could sort of help people teach the more applied sense of NLP and machine learning in general. So, what are your thoughts about creating a specific course for this in colleges? Like, is that something that is there, or could that also come about where, like, this book could serve as a handbook, and would that be a good course for students, like, apart from a book being there for it?
So I think there are courses like that in many universities, right? Like, I mean, they may not use a book specifically about applied NLP, but there are courses focusing on applied aspects which still use traditional books, supplemented with more like hands-on projects kind of things. So considering that, I think this book, although we didn't intend this book to be used by college students, our main audience were more like people working in the industry. As we finished the book, and as I started talking about this book with my ex-colleagues who are working as faculty members in different universities, I realized that that's also a possibility. Because clearly there is no right textbook for people who want to teach more applied aspects of NLP in their courses, other than making students do more and more hands-on projects. That is a good approach, but then even those hands-on projects are typically focused on building a model and testing it on a standard test set, but clearly that's not what happens in the real world. So like I mentioned before, although we didn't see this book as that kind of textbook, I now, after going through the process and then after talking to people, now I see that's also a possibility. There need not be a course around this book, but the existing applied NLP courses probably can benefit from this.
I would like to add something as a student, which I faced in my master's, because I was doing my master's in data science. And most of the time, like when I was studying, even nowadays, there are so many data science institutes that are coming in the top universities as well. They're having dedicated data science courses, which are like full-time, that is parallel with the computer science, like normal computer science master's courses, right? And what's the problem in these courses? And most of the time, in a specific domain like NLP, people still need to take the computer science courses that are being offered, and most of the time they're not they're probably 50% helpful for these folks, but they're not as tailored for these students who really are trying to learn this application specific side of it. And I think definitely new courses can be designed in these new institutes and new courses where you could use this book as a handbook, or you may not, but this approach can definitely be taken. This is the problem I faced when I was doing my master's. I had to take a computer science course that benefited me later because I'm doing my PhD in computer science. That's a different story. But I have seen my friends, they were not that much benefited by that course, because they found it extremely difficult, or they found it irrelevant when they finally joined the industry. So, yeah.
Yeah, and to add to what Bodhi just said, not just the data science institutes, there is a lot of focus on NLP outside of data science and computer science. Humanities, as an example, is using NLP for a lot of analysis. Business schools, when they need to build certain projects which are NLP related, so we have, say, our introductory chapters or chapter 1 or the end chapter. They would even be relevant for a business, completely business course, for example. And humanities, a lot of stuff that we cover, and wherever in humanity courses people are applying NLP, so that can also be used as a handbook, because there are other NLP-like courses like computational linguistics. This can be a supplement to the more traditional textbooks which are there in computation.
Right. To also add to what Bodhi just said, being a student myself, like having been a student myself, I realized that most of what we were taught in college was preparing us better for a position in academia as compared to a position in the industry. Even though colleges are more sort of highlighting the fact that they are giving 100% placement and things like that, but that is something that probably we can agree is quite a lot missing in the topics that are being taught. It is more theoretical and it does not sort of bridge that gap. So probably, yeah, we could see, it would be nice to see a rise in the applied aspects of these subjects, and probably that is something that students could benefit from.
And I think just to add to that, Mukul, at least in certain US universities, a course like machine learning or NLP would have like 4 versions. Right, a very basic one focused on undergrad, and then a slightly better one focused on masters and advanced undergrads, and then something that is focused on a PhD, and something that is focused on a PhD, just not any PhD, just a PhD in machine learning. So there are certain courses, but that is only there at a very small amount of universities. And the courses which are more catered to undergrads, as you said, are more focused on applied work aspects than the more advanced courses. But I totally agree that this sort of scheme of 4 or 5 courses for a specific subject cannot be scaled to most schools, because then those schools need to have that kind of bench in terms of their faculty and researchers.
I'd like to add to something Harshit said, which I didn't think of earlier. So people from other disciplines working on NLP. So I myself taught NLP courses to liberal arts disciplines, students in liberal arts disciplines. I agree with what Harshit said. Most textbooks are written for, or Bodhi said, most textbooks are written for researchers, preparing people for research, but most textbooks are also written for computer science students. However, when we are teaching these courses, these people are not really, like I taught courses where people came from English teaching background and journalism background as well, because they use a lot of textual analysis in their work, and they want to get like basic models, like say how to do text classification or how to train a topic model, things like that. They neither have the kind of theoretical maths background that a computer science student has, nor they want it for this kind of work. But we don't have textbooks for them. Like, I mean, I used to blog a lot about these kind of issues when I was teaching. So I didn't think of this until Harshit mentioned right now that this book can potentially, some chapters of this book can potentially be useful to that audience as well. But yeah, I mean, now that it came, I think it can be useful for non-engineering audience to get some NLP done in their projects.
Right, and just to add to what Sowmya added, now what's happening in a lot of schools is that machine learning course or some computer science introductory courses are being taken by pretty much the entire school. The school may have liberal arts, may have engineering. So, say Harvard has a course called CS50 that essentially all Harvard students take. Earlier, it was just an introductory course to computer science. Stanford's and Berkeley's, UC Berkeley's machine learning courses, everybody in those institutes are trying to take, and those courses are so oversubscribed, right? And it's as Sowmya rightly said, most of the people who are trying to take these courses don't come from a theoretical computer science background, or at times even engineering.
Yeah, like for example, my advisor takes an introductory course in data science, and in 1 quarter, which is 3 months, the number of participants is 800, including undergrad and graduate students. So you could imagine.
Right. So, in fact, my next question was going to be about. So, we started discussing about how your backgrounds contribute to the book, but the next question was going to be about what different kinds of people could benefit from the book, and a little bit of it has been mentioned in your answers about how it could cater to students, researchers, developers, machine learning engineers, business leaders, product managers. So, I think we've discussed the engineering side of it, but could we talk more about how it helps people who are not from an engineering background or not from a computer science background, and people like probably the product managers who just know that there are deep learning technologies that my engineers could benefit from, and probably they could just impose that. But what sort of ideas could they get from the book about how to be more intelligent in dealing with the newer technologies, and how to not just use what's the most trending thing, but yeah, like how can those people benefit from the book?
Yeah. So, Mukul, the short answer as to who could be a target audience is anybody and everybody who is doing AI in industry, especially if these people are doing for the first time, or their team or their organization is doing AI for the first time. The long answer would be starting from a data scientist who is about building models. A lot of people think that being a data scientist means building some very cool models. Reality is far from it. And the book talks of various constraints under which data scientists often have to work, various choices they have to make. Uh, there could be product managers. In today's world, AI is a crucial way to add edge to your products. And hence, it is important that product managers understand what AI can and cannot do. Unfortunately, often we have seen that their understanding comes from popular articles where they believe AI can do anything, which is far from the case. So it helps. I mean, this book can help them truly understand what the whole process of building AI models means. And this is extremely crucial because by being a product manager, they are the owner of product. And by virtue of that, they are also owner of collecting the data. And unless that is done, you have a foresight that, hey, tomorrow we might have to build something like that. Hence, today, we must start collecting data of that kind of thing. And that's a very crucial piece. These could be annotators, people who are there to label data so that it can be used by AI teams, for them to understand what the entire process looks like and how crucial annotation is to AI project as of today. I mean, most of the success that we have seen, at least in industry for sure, is coming out of supervised learning. And annotation becomes extremely crucial. And the quality of annotation, anything wrong up there, that can have huge implications down the line. ML engineers, so that they understand what it means to deploy models and build best practices in order to have AI products running. At the end of the day, you're building products and not models. And they have a huge role to play in terms of data pipelines, monitoring, real-time updations and stuff like that. And I think most importantly, business leaders, because they are the ones who take crucial decisions as to what paths are to be taken, what products are to be conceived. And for them to know what AI cannot do is extremely important. The problem is not so much in computer vision, because in computer vision, both because of models and techniques, a lot of problems are, or at least a lot of run-of-the-mill problems are very easily solvable. But that is still not the case when it comes to NLP. And hence I said that anybody and everybody who has a stake in an AI project in an organization, barring the ones who have been doing AI for a very long time, so the Googles and the Facebooks and the Amazons that have been doing AI right from the word go, I think barring them, anybody and everybody in industry would be benefited from some aspect or the other. And that's how the book has been written. So chapter 1, 2, and 11 are primarily for leaders, people who plan and own projects, while chapter 3 to 10 are primarily for people who build stuff.
And to add to what Anuj just said, product managers and business leaders, they don't operate in isolation, right? So there is a broader ecosystem that a product manager will report to, their head of product, and they need to set the expectations right. They need to set the product roadmap right. So if they don't understand what is possible, and if they get carried away by hype, then essentially that affects their roadmap, and that affects the whole organization's roadmap. Similarly, a business leader might be talking to markets externally, might be talking to investors, and if they promise something which is not possible, or which is not feasible, that is only going to affect them. So, and this is something that we think that is just not covered in a formal manner anywhere. And that is why we added some of those aspects to those chapters that Anuj was saying, especially 1, 2, and 11, that are relevant to these two broad groups.
Right. So Anuj mentioned a little bit about how the book has been structured. So could either of you give like a roadmap to the whole book about how it was structured, about what was the thought process behind creating a structure? Like, I believe you start with the basics a little bit, and towards the end you diversify into 3 specific applications, just so that the reader can get a more practical understanding of what has probably been discussed in the earlier chapters. So yeah, could someone like give a roadmap to the book, how probably the reader should approach the book, and which parts could help in which aspects of building a product or understanding about the industry or the various aspects that the book covers?
So the book, we categorize the book into 4 sections primarily, and each section has a different focus. Like the first part is covering foundational aspects, like starting right from what is NLP and what aspects of language make NLP difficult, more challenging, to some common applications. What applications need what level of language processing? What are some common methods in NLP, like say rule-based or machine learning or deep learning? What are some common deep learning approaches? Or why deep learning may not be the solution for everything? So we give a broad overview of what exactly is NLP, and both in terms of theoretical perspective as well as what it means to apply NLP to build NLP applications in the industry. And then we go in that section, we go into what is a typical NLP pipeline, different stages in that, like right from how do you collect data, say for example, like which in most cases in research scenarios is typically assumed you already work with the data set, but that's not the case when you're actually in the industry. So we start talking about those kind of aspects, like once you get the data, what do you do with it? How do you clean it? What kind of pre-processing do you do? How do you build models? So we just give an overview of these aspects and then discuss. So say, for example, discussing about a general pipeline is different from a specific pipeline. Like let us say I want to build a chatbot. There are some differences between building a chatbot and say building a text classification system. So those kind of differences we talk in section 2, like where we have core NLP tasks. We discuss about, say, classification or information extraction, chatbots, say topic models, search, and these kind of things. In the foundations, we also talk about how actually do we represent text on computers, right? Like there are different kinds of features that one can extract from text, like starting from very basic common ones, like say bag of words and things like that, to more recent ones, like say using a model BERT, which is very common now. So it's some kind of progression. Like we start with these foundations, we deal with the core tasks, and then we go into how exactly do these come together in different industry verticals, like say e-commerce or healthcare, finance, or how do you use social media to get different kinds of information. And at the end, we put all these things together and talk more about what does an end-to-end NLP process look like. Even talking about how do you build AI teams, like more practical advice on what things you should look for, and say how do you even things like what are some good management processes like for building data science products. That's also something that is not typically discussed even within industry. I think, like even within my brief experience in the industry, like like say traditional software management processes don't work for data science projects. So that is also something we talk about in the book. In the very end, like the last section of the book deals with that. So yeah, I think I gave a very long answer to your short question.
No, it's all right.
I can add a little bit to what Sowmya just said, especially in the domain specific section. And there is a bit of back referencing that we do to the previous two sections, like in the introduction, like where we introduce very basic machine learning algorithms or various representation techniques for text, and then the core task we go deep dive into specific tasks like classification and information extraction, etc., etc. We reflect back all of these tasks in the either in the case studies or explaining various examples in the domain specific cases, so that it's not completely tangential to the people who or to the reader, that okay, these are some random applications of NLP techniques in various domains, but especially they refer back to specific code examples, even notebooks that we provide. And we say that okay, now we have boiled down a domain problem detailed enough so that you can just treat this as a normal classification problem, and then you forget everything and just apply what you have done in chapter 4. And that's the right way of thinking, and that's actually useful for beginners as well as senior leaders. For the beginners, it's easy to implement those codes, so they don't get bogged down with the domain specific details. On the other hand, for the product managers and leaders, it's useful because they can come from the domain side of it and they don't get bogged down with the nitty gritty and implementation details. So that's a nice gap we try to bridge based on the first two sections and the third section.
Right. So one more thing that I noticed in the book was about how you guys are focused on the project planning aspect of it. And we've discussed the parts about how to approach a problem, how to understand whether it is a feasible problem or not. But a few more things that you've covered are about how to build the right team. And this is probably something that Anuj and Harshit can talk about since they've led teams. And so, yeah, what does it take to build the right team? And like in the context of building a successful project in the industry. So could you talk about that, please?
Yeah, Mukul, there are various facets to this. I mean, and it starts by, are you even solving the right problem and are you looking at the right tool? I mean, I've seen scenarios where in one of the organizations, they were trying to solve a customer support problem and they were planning to use deep learning models. Finally, turned out that the amount of cost in terms of manpower and hardware resources were much greater than the amount of savings that was to come by automating some aspects of customer support. Or I've seen cases where somebody was trying to apply a NER system and he had 200 data points. He was trying to run a state-of-the-art deep learning model. So there are various parts to it. A team that understands, one, is it the right problem? Two, is it the right time to solve this problem? Three, is it the right approach at this point in time? And when I say that, how much data is there? So most organizations, if you talk, they'll say, oh, we have tons of data, gigabytes of data. But the truth is, when you look at the quantity and quality of it is completely different picture. Half of these values will be NaN. And most machine learning models cannot even deal with that. And this is a very simple example of it. One of the biggest reasons XGBoost is used is because it can handle NaN. And that's the practicality of things, right? Then, from a business leader point of view, what is the ROI? You're going to build something, you're going to deploy. What is the return on investment? How soon can that return start? So in most cases, you end up spending doubly or triply the cost initially because you have a makeshift solution and a ML solution being developed in parallel. The ROI comes over a period of time. Also understanding that a good experience is not just about model. So, I mean, there's an analogy that I and Harshit have often talked of, that a model is like somebody who is on a trapeze performing great stunts. But once in a while, the model will fail, or it can be more often. And then what are your safety nets? And how you design your UI UX around your model itself can have huge implications how people perceive when your model makes a mistake. Because machine learning models are not human-made brains. They will make tons of mistakes. And managing that expectation at various levels, both within the organization and to your customers, become extremely crucial. From a team perspective, hiring the best PhDs, does it guarantee you success? Might not be the case, because in academia, you have data sets which are standard data sets, well cleaned, well labeled. It's all about building a model that can take the state of the art by, or push the state of the art by 0.5% or 1% or whatever is that number. When you come in industry, 80% of your time will be around battle around data. And that's a completely different perspective. So I would say these are various facets. And then from a process point of view, right? What are the various stages? As Sowmya mentioned earlier also, lot of people in industry think because at the end of the day, machine learning model is a code, anything and everything in software engineering is directly applicable. Truth is that is not the case. So these are various facets that a team has to have within themselves in order to successfully execute. The organizations that have been doing for a long number of years thoroughly understand these things inside out. A lot of organizations which are new learn it often the hard way. So yeah, I think that's the long answer to your question, but I hope I've covered most of the points. Harshit and Bodhi can add more to whatever I might have missed.
So I think for teams, one experience that I have had is that obviously it's great to have a great mix of people, and it's funny that we can even say that at times you need PhDs, you need engineers, you need people who can hack together stuff quickly, and in some sense that like the team of our book. So maybe the team of a book is similar to what you need to have inside your org. One caveat that I'll add is that often at reasonably early stages, it may not always be a great idea to just, and when the team is small, to have someone from these very large organizations and who has just built models. Because at these very large organizations, they are also, they are also dealing with the abundance of data, either labeled data or data that they, that is implicitly being generated by users. And that may not be true for your organization. And sometimes certain business leaders think that, hey, if I can get someone from this organization and he has built models at this scale, they might just work without any support, without any support system, which may not always be.
Yeah, and I think I'll add one more point, Mukul, as an afterthought here, is that in large organizations, there is no one AI team. There are multiple AI teams that work at multiple levels. So you will have teams that will work at the cutting edge, pushing the boundaries. But you'll also have AI teams within the product who will use run-of-the-mill solutions and run-of-the-mill algorithms to incorporate AI into products. This is something that is often missed by most other organizations, and they often end up going for the cutting edge rather than actually realizing what they really need. So like Bodhi has had chance to work in teams which are work at the edge of it. But these are not the teams that will build AI into products. And those are completely different challenges, completely different constraints.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize the point Anuj made earlier in his answer, that most of the time, all of the big companies says that we have tons of data, we have terabytes of data, but and maybe it is true. Maybe if you just go into their data centers, they do have terabytes of data. But I think the real question is that when you are solving a problem, do you have the data for that problem? Do you have terabytes of data for that specific problem? And most of the cases, the distribution of this data is really long tail. You have lots of data for a very simple problem that can be very easily solved, and that's probably already solved by your team. And then you really struggle to this long tail of problems where you really struggle with data or you really don't have any data. So that's always a misconception that most of the time people have in the industry. Whenever they promote themselves, they say that we have lots of data. So by doing that, they kind of believe in that, but that's probably not true when you actually introspect and see this long tail of problems. So I think it's educational in two ways. One is that to realize that you have this long tail of problems that for which you don't have the data. So realization that you don't have the data is important, but also what is important to understand how many problems you can actually solve. So if you just know that there are only 2 or 3 problems in a domain you could solve, then you are really living in a pocket. But when you come out of it and actually finally realize that, okay, even in this domain you could solve so and so, like 30 NLP problems, then you can actually expand your teams, expand your data collection strategies, etc. And then the distribution become more uniform and richer, and then you could attack this problem in a more intelligent fashion.
Yeah, so as a matter of fact, Mukul, in our book, we actually use an analogy. So I mean, we all know the famous line, "Data is the new oil," which is great and correct. But here we are talking of the crude oil. If you view your model as a fighter jet that can deliver stuff for you, a fighter jet cannot fly on a crude oil. And what you need are refineries that can convert that crude oil into aviation fuel that can be used by fighter jet. And most big organizations know this extremely well. They have large data engineering teams. Often you'll find that their data engineering teams are 4x, 5x of size of AI teams that build this extensive infrastructure that can filter out crude oil into various components on which various subsystems and models can run. And that's something that is a crucial piece that is missing in most organizations.
And so Anuj talked about these two different teams, the teams which are doing very cutting edge work and teams which are, doing very ad hoc work in the same organization. So I think what's also important is that as organizations get larger, it's important that these two teams directly talk to each other. And that's what happens at the largest organizations, that these cutting edge teams, give these APIs or give these models which other people, or give these pipelines that other people who are building these ad hoc things could use, okay, frameworks that other people can use. And that is something that also we touch upon, and I think that's important when your AI team or your organization grows, to have more platform dependent teams, as well as teams who are building a certain platform that other teams can use.
Yeah, thank you for the amazing analogies, Anuj. And so now that we've talked about how the book has been written, about the key topics that it's covering, I wanted to know how the response has been to the book. I see that it is topping the charts on Amazon, and also it has received quite a lot of diverse reviews from different kinds of people. And I think the theme for this episode could be diversity among the authors, among the topics that are being covered in the book, among the type of people who could benefit from the book. And that is also there with the types of reviews that you've received from leaders, senior research scientists, and practitioners as well. So could you talk about how the response has been and like what feedback you've received about the book?
So I think, as you mentioned, that the book has been doing pretty well on Amazon. We also got very positive feedback from our readers. There was a reader who ended up saying that, there was this Memorial Day weekend or July 4th weekend, and they had nothing to do, and they ended up using the entire long weekend to read the book. So there has been a lot of positive feedback from our readers as well. I think I'll let others speak about specifically different folks who gave us endorsements. But I'll just say that the diversity is that some people are coming from pure research background. Some people are coming from research leadership backgrounds. Some people are coming from engineering and executive leadership backgrounds. And then we also have people who are in the trenches or who are practitioners who are building models who are used by other people. So we have all these people that have also endorsed us, and looks like are reading our book.
Yeah, I can talk about some sweet memories I have. For example, in one of the team I'm working, in one of our team meeting, one of the senior researcher actually took out the hard copy of our book from his bookshelf and showed to everyone. So that was a pleasant surprise to me, but it also adds to the confidence that we have that even these senior researcher folks who are doing very hardcore research and cutting edge research, they also feel the need of the book. As he mentioned, that this would be even useful for anyone who are doing NLP in any capacity in the industry. So that was really ensuring that we tried to hit the right chord, and this was a timely book. Yeah, in general, even I know, there are many undergraduate students in various schools. I always hear from my friends who are in different US universities. They say that they have heard undergraduate students in public places, buses, they are talking about the books, and that's also very, very encouraging to all of us, apart from all the formal praises and reviews that we got in the Amazon. So yeah, that's
great.
the unaccounted kind of reviews and praise what we got so far. Others can talk about what we already have right now in the online.
I'd also like to mention that we have been getting a few errata submissions on the O'Reilly webpage. So they're not like major errors or anything. They're relatively smaller things to address, but still I find it very I find it happy that somebody has bothered to go so much into detail, not just about reading the book, but then again coming back and saying, there are these, say, spelling mistakes or something can be rephrased or something like that. I mean, like I said, they're not like major technical errors or something, some major feedback or something, but it just shows the amount of attention to detail readers are giving to the book, right? That's always good. Like if the book is bad, nobody bothers to do all these things.
Right. So there was a French reader when we are demonstrating a French translation example. They pointed out that hey, there was a little small word that was missing, a syllable almost that was missing in a French translation, and they took the trouble to write, write a errata for it.
I was actually thinking about how, since you've covered so many aspects, and like Bodhi mentioned, like you have students and leaders and all those people from different walks of life, from different fields, not just engineering, not just people in business, or not just leaders. So it's great to see how it is sort of starting a conversation between multiple disciplines, and which is, I mean, I feel we need more books like these which can involve a lot more people and sort of bridge the gap between different disciplines that have formed over time, because for products to improve and for the field to go in probably in a better direction that is more inclusive of the different ideas that different people can bring, I think we need more books like these. Yeah, so thank you for spending the time on creating this. Yeah, right. So Sowmya, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to say thanks. Thanks for the kind words.
Okay. Right. So yeah, so my next question was about the process of writing the book, and all of you have collaborated into writing a book, but what does it take to take a book from one draft to the final one that goes into production? And so probably you could talk about the role of the publisher and about how those drafts are converted into finally what goes out. So I don't think many people know about that process. It's only something that you learn when you write a book. So could you sort of give a picture about that process so that like people like me or anyone who probably would want to write a book in the future can sort of learn from?
We'll walk you through that entire process. So the first part is obviously talking to some people and getting your proposal accepted. And a big part of that is how your book stands out from all other books, and is there still a market for it, right? You can still write a book which stands out, but there's no market for it because it's for a very, very niche thing. So and how do you generally get your proposal accepted is either you reach out to people in your network or somebody will reach out to you and so on. So once that is accepted, you need to essentially agree with them on a timeline on at what stage will you complete each chapter. What our publisher did was that after completion of half the chapters, all the chapters went to a technical review, and that technical review helped us in shaping a lot of parts of the book, right? And then they even do an early release, or what you can say as a beta version of the book. That again gives you different feedback. and then you keep submitting the chapters. They go for another technical review just to make sure everything is all right. And then this all the process that you talked about gets started. So things like typesetting, things like making sure the pictures are correct, things like making sure the references are correct, or there are no quotes that are used in a non-copyright manner. So all of these are taken care of by the publisher. What we were very fortunate about is having O'Reilly as our publisher. And O'Reilly Media is like probably the oldest tech publisher, probably the most well-known tech publisher, and a lot of books that we looked up to while writing the book, as well as while reading about all these different technologies, were published by O'Reilly. So they were experts in whatever they did, and they steer us to the right things that we would have missed had they not been around. So that is what I would say has been very fortunate for the book.
This is probably something that you would have considered. So I wanted to know that since all of us know that machine learning and deep learning is quite a fast-paced field, there are new papers being published every day, new tools being put out there, and it's difficult for people to keep track of things. And therefore, books that try to talk about certain aspects of the field can become obsolete in some sense in the future, wherein probably a book talks about a certain way of doing things, and in 6 months, there's one model that sort of takes care of it all, and moving forward, all of those things are only taken care by that model. So have you thought about the fact that certain parts of the book could get obsolete in the coming years? Were you cognizant of that? Have you sort of tried to make sure that there are things that go beyond, that stand the test of time? And what are some of the things that would be perennially important through the book?
So I think we thought about this. We thought about parts of our book becoming obsolete even when we were writing it, and that is why our focus has not been to just focus on a specific algorithm and give entire details of that, because as you said, that specific algorithm or that specific model would become obsolete in a few months or in a year. But we give a broader framework which we think could still be applicable 5 years down the line when they are much more advanced models. So that is one thing that we thought that was very important in our mind while we are writing this book. I think others can add.
I'd like to add that we also, at many points in the book, say the same thing. The state of the art changes very frequently in this field. So we are not just focusing on that. We are doing a whole range of things. Right? For example, in text classification, or in chapter 3 or chapter 4, I clearly remember writing about that particular part, like why we don't have examples of all the state of the art models. Like, say, we have one example with BERT, but we don't have examples of all the recent models because they keep changing. And even from the time we started writing that chapter to the time the final version of the chapter came, a lot of new things happened. So we emphasize that fact throughout the book as well. There are, of course, as Harshit mentioned, there are, of course, things that are relevant, I think, for some time to come. But we also emphasize that what we talk about as state of the art now will not remain state of the art after some time.
Yeah, I think, Mukul, if we say that the entire chapter is like a building, then and SOTA is like the upper floor. So some of the upper floors might change, and as Sowmya rightly mentioned, but I think the foundations will remain for next 2, 3, or maybe even 5 years. Shelf life of a book is a question that we have considered right from the word go, and I believe it will live up to that thought for some time to come, for sure.
And we are also planning to, maybe in a few months, once we are done with all these events, have a small blog where we'll, link the state of the art with how that connects with a certain chapter or certain section of the book. So that is helpful for the readers who already have purchased the book. That this is how what I know is relevant with what the state of art is. What we also think is that would be helpful for us to write a very exhaustive second edition. that'll be useful, and without having to do all the research again, because that keeps track of all the major stuff.
Have you started working on the second edition already?
No, but we we don't know if there'll be a second edition. We are planning that. If there was something like that, and if we all of us had the bandwidth, how would we go about doing that? That is the point of the blog.
Right. So talking about new state of the arts coming and things moving quickly, things getting obsolete, new models taking over earlier implementations, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is GPT-3. And I mean, there's a lot of hype, as we all know. Uh, I'm curious as to how you think about this. This has come after your book has launched, I think. And does this affect anything that you talk about in the book, or how do you guys look at it? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would like to take that question because myself being a PhD in language generation, this is definitely a very important moment to ponder about. That is it the defining moment that we all have been looking for, and is it the case that we have solved one of the biggest challenges that are currently so many researchers are tackling. But I think I would be very careful as there are many follow-up blogs that are coming up on GPT-3. It's true that these big models, which has of the order of 100 billion parameters, has extreme capacity, and one of the boon of being a very good at hallucinating different things, worlds around you, because I think people do believe, or at least the way we work, we think about it. Let's say if I give you a cue about a story title, you could very easily come up with a story, and the way you do it is by hallucination. So hallucination kind of is a layman term that links to a very technical term that's called generalization in machine learning. That whenever you see certain data, you try to find out common patterns that you could generalize on data that you haven't seen, and that's a holy grail, right? That's we all have been trying to solve that. When you have certain data, you train a model, but just let the model work on unknown data sets that you have, and that's what GPT-3 is apparently doing. It's an extremely powerful tool as a zero shot or a few shot model, where you have a huge model, you have a specific use case, you just give certain data points for your use case, and it'll just work do wonder in that specific domain, and that's definitely very, very useful. But I would refrain it calling a defining moment or a path breaking moment, just because that uh, maybe on the surface these models are doing great job. These models are catering to the problem. Again, I think to the cherry picked examples, or even not even cherry picked examples, but the simpler examples in that particular task that you're trying to solve. For example, in a dialogue, let's say if you want to use GPT-3, maybe you can ask questions like, hi, how are you, and probably it would give you great answers. Or even you can try to ask trick questions like, okay, what's the meaning of life, etc., and it might still give you a good answer, which probably none of the other models can even do that. It probably doesn't even understand. But that's not the end of it. That's very good for a demo. That's good. That's very good for giving an example and how powerful your model is. But whenever you think about user applicability, whenever you are thinking about trying to put that model in interactive systems where end users will be using, then it's very important what you're generating is actually useful, is actually consistent, is actually fact checked, and also have does not cross the boundary of ethics, and does not spit out foul languages, right? So all of that problems really comes when you try to deploy these huge models into the production, try to use it in a user facing use cases. So I think people are still figuring it out and experimenting with this GPT-3, and there have been lots of examples, negative examples, where it still generated racist comments, biased languages. That is always a problem in all of the generation models. That is one. But also cases where people try to use it for a very specific purposes, like that deals with extremely specific entities for a certain domain, where the hallucination is still not working. It's still doing a great job, but it's not doing the right job, or it's still not giving you the factual kind of sentences that it should generate or a human should write. So So there is always a gap between what you could do in a more fancy level and come up with very fluent languages from this model. But then there is a whole range of spectrum of control generation, fact-based generation, where you have to be factually correct, etc., etc. You have to be commonsensical, you have to be ethical, etc. And I think all of those problems are still open. So it's definitely a good step towards it, but we definitely have a lot to work on.
I think, Mukul, the best way would be that if you look at ML way to answer it, look at the past if you want to predict the future. So I think there was similar euphoria around a LSTM or a GRU or a attention network or a BERT. And that is important also because that's when the adoption really starts. And it's only when the adoption starts, people go to threadbare details to bring out various issues. So now if you see currently, you'll see hundreds of papers talking of what are the drawbacks of BERT. Right? And I'm sure you will see similar things there. I mean, no two questions about all these models are bringing a lot of new perspective and ways to attack problems. But is this the silver bullet? I am not very sure. I would say a cautious optimism is better. That's how I would go about it.
We can see the hype that's there around GPT-3, but even the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, he's also tweeted to say that what GPT-3 can do is only a very early glimpse of how AI can change the world, and probably it's too soon to expect a lot from this model. And yeah, probably a cautious approach would be a better one to understanding how effective it can be in real life. Right. So before we close, I wanted the last section of the episode to resonate with the last subsection of the book, which is about peeking over the horizon. So, in your understanding, what does this hype about GPT-3 talk about our overall understanding of how these fields are moving and about how AI and machine learning are going to pan out in the next few years or in the next few decades? So, could you give us a glimpse of how these fields are going to evolve over the years and how sort of you've tried to incorporate that message into the book so that readers could sort of get an understanding about how these fields are moving and how probably they could make sense of that and probably align themselves more towards how the fields are changing. So could you share your thoughts about that?
Now, so I think we just talked about GPT-3 and Bodhi was mentioning that how it is probably a little superficial. It really doesn't understand everything, and that is what some demos have also been showing. So what some people have been thinking about is how do you measure intelligence? Because right now most of the metrics that we are using are quite narrow for a very specific task, which might not generalize, which might not pass during test, or which might not really be useful in a more broader intelligence. So there has been some work by the inventor of Keras on how do you define intelligence, and then there has been other works from cognitive scientists as well on what really intelligence is and how you can build better machines. So that is one way of looking at it. That maybe in the future, maybe in 5 years, there'll be better measures of defining this intelligence, and hence better models or models which are more tuned to that measure of intelligence as opposed to RMSE or MAPE or whatever models that we are working on that we focus. So that is one way of looking at it, which is people will define different measures of intelligence. The other way is that as as we see that AI is being used more and more in all businesses and products. And then people are thinking about the new business of AI because essentially it's now a business also than just academic discipline that it used to be a decade or 2 decades back. So, and in this, there are different aspects that consulting companies like McKinsey and BCG have come that where does very specific aspects of AI help for your business and where they don't. We specifically mentioned it in the book because for business leaders who are in a specific domain, reading that specific BCG or McKinsey report would be really helpful in understanding that these are the aspects that I can focus on in my product or in my business, and these aspects still take longer time, right? So that for that, academic researchers are not the most suited for on this talking to directly to academic researchers may not get you the right answer if you're a business leader who's thinking of making a new business. The other aspect of that would be, how investors are thinking about it. And, I would not go into too much details of that because this is finally a deep learning podcast. But I would recommend everybody reads the Business of AI blog post by Andreessen Horowitz, which is a Silicon Valley investor. And maybe we can provide a link to that as well. And, these are essentially two very different ways about thinking about where AI and machine learning and NLP would be in the next 5 years.
All right then. Thank you so much, Bodhi, Sowmya, Harshit, and Anuj, for sharing your insights about the field. Many congratulations and all the best for your upcoming book. And it's already doing quite well, and I hope it stands the test of time, and that I'd be reading it 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And I'll probably cut this part out because I would like to read it before that. But probably even people in the next generation could benefit from your hard work, from the 3 years that you spent in sort of amalgamating all of your insights into this one book. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thanks for spending, waking up early or spending so late for Sowmya and Bodhi. And
Yeah, thank you, everyone. It's a very
Thank you so much, Mukul.
well organized.
Thank you very much, Mukul. I mean, I now see the amount of work that goes into each podcast.
Right.
Yeah.
So someone should interview the podcasters, really.
As you didn't see for the book.
Yeah.